Next month, my co-host Dalia Shandlin is joining an array of experts for a weekend of talks and debate on the Middle East. The event takes place in Weston Park, a magnificent stately home in the UK, between the 23rd and 25th of March. Other speakers include the New York Times Tehran correspondent Thomas Erdbrink and Nicholas Blandford, the Beirut-based journalist. The event is being organised by the UK travel company Political Tours. Stay tuned for more details about the event at the end of this podcast.
This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review. Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to books and ideas and fascinating things, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic, and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm Dalia Shandlin.
And I'm Gilad Halpern. Our guest today is an assistant professor of anthropology at Tel Aviv University. She is the author of a new book entitled When the State Winks, the Performance of Jewish Conversions in Israel, that came out in English by Columbia University Press. It explores what is perhaps the most palpable fault line of the lack of separation between synagogue and state in Israel, the Giyur, conversion of immigrants from the former Soviet Union who were able to become Israeli citizens under the law of return despite not being halachically Jewish. What is the price that individual Israelis pay for the monopoly of the chief rabbinate on certain aspects of life in Israel? Dr. Michal Kravel Tovi is here to help us figure it out. Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you so much.
So the title of your book is When the State Winks. But isn't Giyur a straightforward process? Why does the state need to wink?
Because conversion is actually an impossible achievement, because it is marked by profound tensions between Zionist, inclusive, even missionary inclinations. They really attempt to include all immigrants into the national fold. At the same time, it is restricted and enacted by religious, rabbinical, exclusive gatekeeping work. So it is an impossible. There is a tension between the fact that it is marked by the idea of wanting to take care of the population, about the demographic makeup, about the composition, about the boundaries, about the size of the Jewish population. At the same time, it references only individuals, only families and individuals, as if the population doesn't really matter. So given these tensions, it is impossible for the state to achieve this goal unless it winks at the candidates, at the converts. So it is a system, it's a mutual system of winking at each other. But I use this notion of winking, which is a colloquial notion, but I distance myself from its popular simplistic meanings, which I mean that I do not think about it as a kind of lying or a deception, but in a way of performance, which is a total different concept.
I think you need to back up and give us some background. Like, what do we know anything about the actual portion of those over 1 million former Soviet immigrants who entered Israel? There's less than 1 million who are still here. But what percentage of them actually were not considered by the state to be halachically Jewish?
By the rabbinate.
By the rabbinate, yes, of course, because the state let them in.
Right. The number is actually debatable and it is changing, but the icon that I kept hearing during fieldwork was 300,000 Jews. Now it is more 350. I conducted my fieldwork between 2004 and 2007.
So 1 in 3 immigrants was not halachically Jewish.
Right.
And then talk a little bit more about the stereotype that you were trying to avoid. You're saying you don't want to play into this myth of them going through some kind of a fake, lying conversion. What is that stereotype? Where does it come from?
Because the process itself is really painstaking. I mean, that's one thing that, really comes out of your book.
It is both painstaking and it is not enacted by the wish of people to become religious. They are secular people, so this is part of the painstaking process. It is not only painstaking bureaucratic-wise, but it is painstaking because the state forces them to pretend and act as if they are going to be religion.
They're supposed to assume some sort of identity that's not theirs.
Right. Suspicion is not unique or distinct to the Israeli context. It is prevalent very much here, but you can find it in Turkey, in Indonesia, in India, in so many cases in which conversion conflates national and religious, like material and spiritual realizations or inspirations. In this variety of contexts, conversion is suspected for being something else than the wish to be a religion. In the Israeli context, the suspicion comes from all around. It comes from people who think they only want to get married in the rabbinate. They only want to enter the state and become citizens. This is why people who are tourists or temporary residents are not allowed to undergo conversion. They need to undergo exceptional committee, which actually does not allow them to go through a conversion.
So why do they do it to themselves? Because at the end of the day, they don't really need it on a day-to-day basis. They are Israeli citizens already, right? They are, at least colloquially or in the general spirit of the way things are, associated with the Jewish majority in Israel. When people just run into them on the street, they don't really need to know whether they're halakhically Jewish or not. All they know is, sorry to say that so crudely, that they're not Arab, right?
Right.
So why do they need that?
They do pass sociologically as Israeli Jews. If at all, they pass as Russians, right? They have like traces of accent and they have Russian names. It is true. At the same time, many of them do see themselves as Jews. They feel as if history betrayed them and pushed them outside of the national fold. Some of them are, for example, daughters of Jewish fathers. They considered themselves Jewish. When they immigrated to Israel, they felt that Israel chose them and invited them to come to Israel. And now they feel betrayed and they feel they want to correct this kind of mistake. They feel belong, they need the recognition, they feel they need a thicker texture of a belonging. They want to get married in Israel. They want to feel secured. They want to actually deliver or transmit the Jewish identity to their daughters and sons. They want to be the person that they pass as.
I think you're making it sound a lot softer than it is. This is, sorry for criticizing, but I think you're making it sound like they just kind of want this nice feeling. Whereas I have, hear from many former Soviet immigrants that life in Israel is really heavily constrained by the fact that the rabbinate doesn't recognize them as Jewish.
Right.
Can you talk about some of those constraints?
There is so much anger. There is nothing soft about it. And if I sounded soft, so I misspoken. But I think that belonging is a very thick concept. And the wish, the aspire to belong. Like if Yulia or Sandra or just other people I met tell me, I want the state to stamp me and to recognize the identity in which I see myself, this is a thick thing. But it is not soft at all. There is a lot of anger. There is a lot of distance from religion life. They do want to take something very significant from this process. For example, they tell me stories about how they learned so much throughout this process. They become, for example, conversant in social issues and political issues in ways that they couldn't have been before. They even start to like some of the traditional life, the Jewish life. They don't see themselves as Jewish. They're not motivated by religious life. So between and despite all this anger, they feel as if the state gives them substantial way of becoming more Jewish among friends, with their spouse, with themselves. There is something very substantial here. I don't allow, sorry for a cynical conception. I don't say that some people do not lie. I don't say that some people are not pretending and feel cynical about it. At the same time, for many of them, it is significant in ways that are not recognized by the rabbinate. It's not significant because of religion.
But I want to ask you again, okay, you said it's a significant feeling of being angry, but I think there's also hard constraints. For example, cases that we've heard about where the child of a former Soviet family or a teenager or a boy who's serving in the army dies and is killed in combat but can't be buried even in a Jewish cemetery.
Right.
I mean, these are actual, concrete constraints.
Well, actually, most of the converts are female. So this
Why is that?
Because of the matrilineal descent. So they wish to transmit a secure Jewish identity to their children. At the same time, this type of soldier, this non-Jewish soldier who gives his life, gives the most precious gift to the state, is very much walked through as an icon, as something that both sides, meaning state agents and candidates, speak about. It's a kind of moral exchange. Like many of the conversion agents I spoke with, rabbis, educators, intellectuals, public figures, feel as if conversion is a way of moral exchange, of solidarity, of paying back, giving back to those citizens who became soldiers, who chose to link their life with the Jewish faith, who are productive citizens in terms of economic life. So conversion is a way of paying back. And partially because of this disparity, because this kind of soldier that you just mentioned and the inability of the state to, pay due to give him respect in his very last final act.
But at the end of the day, they are coerced into that process in a way. Some of them jump on the bandwagon happily. Is it not?
Not happily.
Not happily, but you say that this is really the rite of passage as Israelis, and they are immersed in that process of becoming Jewish.
I'm trying to figure out the tension here. Are they forced or coerced in some way, or are they doing this willingly? Which is it more?
Socially coerced.
Yeah, well, socially or in a way politically coerced. Which is it? Are they more coerced somehow, or are they more coming to this of their own free will? Because forced conversion sounds like a pretty horrible thing in a modern democracy.
Right. And actually, Israel has history with coerced conversion. They are coerced in terms of their own sense of feeling that they must do it for their own sake. People told me stories about how insecure they were as children, and they want to deliver more secure. So they do feel coerced. At the same time, no one tells them, no one obligates them to undergo. They can go in the street and they pass as Jews. It is coerced. They feel they must do it for their own sake. Like actually some of the students I met in university, they have to have their BA. They don't want to have style, right? But they want to have their BA. So these candidates are feeling forced that this is the best way for them. It's a kind of cultural script into Jewish belonging. And yet, during this process, which usually takes about a year, they develop all kinds of emotions, right? They have resistance, anger, happiness. They feel sometimes content. They are surprised sometimes by the meaning that they assign to the process in ways that they didn't expect to it before. So, it's all year.
You focus, as we said, on immigrants from the former Soviet Union. Is it for you a separate category? Why did you focus just on them and not on other Olim from other places? Are they being treated differently?
Yeah, they are being treated differently. I didn't plan to focus on them. When I started my fieldwork in 2004, I was not sure who am I going to work with. But as I learned, Israel developed the National Mission Project, and it is specifically targeted at non-Jewish Olim. Most of them are from the Soviet Union, not all of them. Some of them are from South America and from France, but most of them are from Russian language countries. So because they are marked differently by the state, they are approached differently. Those Olim do not pay anything. Like this process is all subsidized.
Unlike
totally.
other Olim?
Tourists, no. Unlike other categories, legal categories like tourists or temporary residents, they are being paid. They are being targeted in social media campaigns in other ways. So they do feel as a separate category.
But this really means that it's a government policy. So tell us about this government policy. I mean, why does the government... You were saying they're not coerced, okay, but they are certainly deeply encouraged as a government policy. Why is this such a high priority for the government? We've talked about why it may be high priority for the immigrants themselves.
Right. The state has an obvious interest to demographically increase its number. It has an interest to co-produce itself and its citizens as national subjects, right?
Of what you call the biopolitical scheme of belonging.
Right. There is a dynamic of co-production where the state produces itself and its own Jewishness while producing its national subjects, their Jewishness. The state is like this coherent entity, right? But it's not like this. There are different people who take upon themselves the responsibility and power to speak and act in the name of the state. So I would differentiate between this teacher who would come to teach 2 evenings in a week, a small group of students in Tel Aviv, and he would just do it because he's motivated by, he's looking for an extra job, and he's a religious Zionist, so he feels he needs to embark on a national mission or to enact the state's national mission. And judges, for example, feel as if they really need to teach those students, those candidates, how to become good Jews. They want to give a sense of being embraced, of welcoming them, of correcting their historical trajectory that they mentioned before, because those people were pushed out of Jewish history and now they are wanted back. So there is a variety of motivations. Most of them are demographic, and I think they're also related to the Jewish morality. Like Israel, the Israeli state, takes upon itself the moral of becoming a homeland for so many people.
I have to ask about something you mentioned very briefly a few minutes ago. You said this is not the first time the state has been involved in conversion.
Right. I actually meant not to the state, but in previous, like in later history, in Jewish history.
What were you referring to?
I'm speaking about the Hashmonaim.
Much earlier Jewish history, the Hasmoneans.
But there are precedents, for example, in the 50s, where Polish spouses of Jewish immigrants came along, and they weren't really asked. Or during the 70s, Rabbi Goren initiated new programs in the IDF, for example. But the national mission, what I called before, was crafted in the late 1980s in response to the influx of non-Jewish immigration from former Soviet Union.
But the former Soviet immigration only started in 1989-90, actually.
Right.
But they crafted the policy beforehand?
No. They crafted it in the late 1980s.
Yeah.
The late 1980s.
Yeah, just as they started coming.
No, but Rabbi Goren referred to different kind of populations. He initiated programs in relation to non-Jewish volunteers in the kibbutzim.
Right. And then there have been also other instances, for example, the Ethiopian Jews. And so there is a hardening. The rabbinical establishment in Israel as of the late 80s is much more hardline than it was before, right? Do you see that as a clear? Or
No, I won't. I observe the daily enactment of conversion. And in daily life, alongside the motto of keeping Orthodox life and monitoring your religious observance, in real enactment, they were much more flexible, and they allowed for much more flexible ways of being modest, of eating kosher. What they really wanted out of these converts is to hear the story that they're willing to take the burden of conversion, which means of religious conduct, and they're willing to take Jewishness as a package deal of something that conflates national and religious thing. They wanted to hear them saying that they are willing to observe religious life and to prove that they are doing this during the process. But they knew very well that in terms of feasibility, those people will remain secular after the process.
Okay, I have a question now about the motivations, because we've talked about the immigrants themselves having some sort of more holistic and nuanced motivations than just coercion. But what about the government's real motivation for this? For example, I have to bring in my public opinion researcher hat. And the iron law of Israeli public opinion is that the more religious people are, the more right-wing they are. And do you think the government, just somewhere in their little subconscious corner of the governmental mind, whatever that means, kind of says, well, we'll have them go through a conversion process. They'll learn about religion. Some of them will become a little bit religious, and we will solidify a sort of religious political direction of the country.
It's the more Catholic than the Pope.
Right.
Or that basically, let me put it bluntly, more religious people, more right-wing voters.
Right. Actually, the Russian-speaking immigrants are right-wing anyway.
But maybe they wanted to make sure they would stay right-wing.
No, but I do agree with you, because the people who enact the national mission of conversion are religious Zionists. They are not the Charade groups.
They're not
so they clearly have this politically wise, and I saw evidence of this political stamps or agenda throughout my fieldwork. When I conducted my fieldwork, it was this engagement from Gaza Strip, and this orange color was everywhere.
Oh, we have to remind our listeners, orange was the color of the protest against the disengagement, taking its inspiration from the Maidan protests in Ukraine.
Right.
Going back to, you kept referring to the fact that your work is ethnography. Tell us a bit about the process of it. How did you get an observer status in the whole thing? Because much of it is pretty personal. The state has a lot to hide.
Right.
Tell us a bit about that.
I think that because the state has a lot to hide, and they are fearing about being thought of as people who have what to hide, they try to be as open as they can. So I feel that actually the institution told me that I'm invited to come in, or they allowed me to come in, mostly because they didn't want to give me a sense of that they have something to hide. So it actually worked in favor of me. I started my fieldwork doing a participant observation in two groups, two ulpans, one in a religious Zionist kibbutz and one in Tel Aviv, not far away from here.
Ulpan is a language school.
No, you use the term ulpan as a religious conversion place.
Right.
Oh, it has
like
nothing to do with the languages. Okay, so
it's a seminar. And I actually had different kind of questions in my mind. I thought that I'm going to work on kind of this essentialized ways of thinking about Jewishness and how the Jewish life is open to people who are outside, coming from the outside. But what everybody cared about is bureaucracy. And I understood that I need to enter into other arenas in which the state formulates and acts in real life this national project. So I became observant, a participant in the ritual bath and in a rabbinical court. I observed hundreds of cases in the rabbinical court. I sat, far away in the far side, the far corner. I just observed. I could not participate. In class, actually, I was much more participant because it was an unfolding dynamic throughout the year.
But did they not notice that you're the odd one out? So did it not affect the dynamic in the...
This is the anthropologist's dilemma.
Right. Everybody knew about who I am, Ethnographers go to the field informing their people that they are potentially informants, right? Yeah. So I presented myself, and the relationship with them as their own relationship were very complicated. They trusted me because I knew something about the court, thing that they actually did not know, because they knew I'm also conducting fieldwork in the rabbinic court. So they knew they can ask me many questions. They knew I'm, in a way, much more committed to them than to the rabbis, the religious Zionist rabbis. They knew about my political stance. They knew I'm not one of them, and teachers knew, and I interviewed most of them later on. It was all very clear. But, in ethnographic work, the relationship themselves become a source of knowledge. They do not disturb the kind of information gathering. It is part of, if they treat me as a secular Jew and they envy me for not needing to present any kind of other persona, I learn much from it. And if the religious Zionists see me also as a Jew, but as a national Jew, that they, think of me as a basically Jewish person, so I also learn much from him.
All right. That is Michal Kravel Tovi, the author of the new book, When the State Winks, the performance of Jewish conversions in Israel, that just came out in English by Columbia University Press. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And a quick note before we end the show. I will be joining Thomas Erdbrink of the New York Times, he's the Tehran correspondent, and a range of other experts in March for a weekend of discussion on the Middle East in the wonderful surroundings of Weston Park, a stately British home. The event takes place between Friday, March 23rd to Sunday, March 25th, and it is being organized by UK travel specialists Political Tours. I'll be discussing Israel-Iranian relations with Thomas Erdbrink. We'll be joined by Nicholas Blandford, the Beirut-based writer who is widely acknowledged as one of the leading experts on Hezbollah. And beyond the Middle East speakers, we will discuss North Korea and the foreign policy vacuum in Washington. The weekend includes 2 nights stay, all meals, and complete use of the house, which has previously served as the venue for the Northern Ireland peace talks and a G8 summit. If you'd like more details, please visit www.politicaltours.com or email info@politicaltours.com.
And also a big thanks to Gizem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, to Itai Shelem, our producer, and to the Van Leer Institute for the generous support. We would also like to thank Peter Frey and Carrie Shapiro and the Rumey Foundation, who made a very generous contribution to the Tel Aviv Review. You too can help us further our quest for knowledge and learning by donating to our Patreon campaign. Just go to our website, tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and you'll see a button. In the meantime, don't forget to check out our archive. There are more than 400 interviews to keep you busy, entertained, and hopefully annoyed. Like us on Facebook. Our page is called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast Ideas from Israel. And follow me and Dali on Twitter. Don't forget to join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.